Although it was believed that Lil Scrappy was getting better, the doctors recently broke the devastating news that his most recent test results were worse than anyone had expected. Suddenly, everything has changed, and the hospital room is tense with doctors whispering gently, machines blaring rapidly, and the Scrappy family feeling terrified. Mama D holds her phone as Bambi waits for responses. The worst part is that no one knows why Scrappy's health is deteriorating so quickly. His breathing is feeble, his heart rate fluctuates, and the medical staff is at a loss for what to do. Right now, this family's only option is to pray for Scrappy to succeed or for something far worse to happen. See how we break down everything, especially the shocking details on his test results, his family's emotional reactions, and the doctor's last-ditch efforts to save his life. No one was ready for this shift. The intensive care unit was a stifling blend of worry and cleanliness, and the room was filled with the constant beep of the monitors, a depressing reminder that every second counted, and the weight of the machine keeping Lil alive. The rapper, once vibrant and full of life, was now a frail person in a life-or-death circumstance. His ordinarily confident face was pale, his breathing was labored, and his health was deteriorating by the time Bambi sat by him, shredding his fingers with shaky hands. The stress of the last few days had affected her typically immaculately manicured nails. In the hospital bed, Scrappy lay still, his chest barely rising and falling with his normal breathing. Standing close to the door, Mama D, the stern matriarch who had always been a rock, watched with gleaming eyes as she pressed her fingers to his cheek, searching for any movement, and said, "Scrappy baby, I'm glad you got in a fight. You assured me that you wouldn't abandon me." Her eyes were swollen from constant crying, and her voice was raspy from whispering prayers that seemed to go unheard. She had fought for her and now had nothing to do but watch in helplessness. Dr. Mitchell, the chief physician, entered the room as the door cracked open. Even though he had protected her child from the outside world all of her life, his normally calm and relaxed face was now marked with weariness and tension. Her arms were crossed tightly, as though to keep herself together, yet her sniffles occasionally revealed that her heart was broken. She wavered slightly on her feet and mumbled to herself, "Lord, don't take my boy, not like this." He took a big breath, clasped his hands together, and looked from Mama D to Bambi. As she heard him say, "We need to talk in a firmer but softer tone than usual," Bambi's eyes begged. He questioned, "What is it that's going on?" This case lifted his spirits after he had previously heard bad news. He understood how much was at stake because he had witnessed the public's outpouring of love and the supporters' impassioned pleadings. Everyone felt as though they had been hit with the news that Scrappy's most recent test results have returned, and they don't look good. Mady took a deep breath, and her hands balled into fists as a heavy silence fell over the room. Mitchell raked his gray hair, and the doctor paused before continuing. "My liver function has drastically deteriorated, his oxygen levels have fallen again, and his kidneys are under a lot of stress." "How awful." Bambi shook her head when you said yesterday that he was getting better. Why did that change so quickly? In a sympathetic speech, Dr. Mitchell stressed the unpredictable nature of situations like his, where the body may sometimes show signs of healing. His heart has been monitored continuously, and there are signs that the strain is getting worse. Even though we're doing everything we can, we might need to consider more drastic measures if Dr. Mitchell's condition doesn't improve the next day. His face grew serious. "It is a battle, and it is getting harder right now." Bambi tightened her hold on Scrappy's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. What does it mean to have nothing to do? When the doctor paused and said, "Dialysis in an emergency, a possible transplant in the event that conditions worsen, and we might have to think about placing him on life support if his heart keeps failing, no." Mama D's sharp voice and maternal instincts came out. "That is not a possibility. Scrappy is a kind of person. This is not how he is going to die," Bambi said in a cry of anguish and despair. After taking one more look at Scrappy's vitals, Dr. Mitchell nodded sadly and said, "We're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens, but I need you both to get ready because the next 24 hours are crucial. The world outside the hospital was already reacting when she continued. My son has been through too much to just give up now. He will succeed. He must. Her voice was shaking but determined. Fans flocked to Instagram and Twitter in a panic for updates, and the hashtag #PrayerForScrappy gained widespread traction. Celebrities, close friends, and other musicians also wrote touching messages urging everyone to send prayers and positive energy. While many who had previously disagreed with Scrappy were putting aside their disagreements to support him, there was a lot of tension and unspoken fears in the hospital room. After a long silence, Bambi said firmly, "We need to call everyone and beg for every prayer we can get." Mama D nodded and took out her phone, saying, "We are fighting, not just praying." Throughout the night, there was just one worry. Would prayer be enough to save Scrappy K this time at the hospital? Every machine that surrounded him was beeping nonstop, emphasizing how urgent the situation was. The situation outside the hospital was equally dire, and despite her tough exterior, Mama D was crying on the inside. Because of Scrappy's fragile condition, every second felt like it went on forever, and the only sound in the room was the monitor's beep, which served as a warning that his future was in doubt. Bambi wiped away her tears and tried to maintain her tough exterior, but the stress of the situation was making her lose her cool. Every major outlet was covering the story, and the media was going crazy. The headlines declared that the family was in despair as Tiny Scrappy's condition deteriorated. Following the viral success of deteriorating health, fans gathered outside the hospital to pray, hold candles, and hope for a miracle. Reporters eager for any inside information were swamped by paparazzi with flashing cameras. Gets worse, and doctors fear that Scrappy may need life support. There was a great deal of dread as Scrappy's best friends, Kirk Frost, Rashida, and Jock, entered through the open door. They hurried to Bambi, their faces turning white with worry, and Mam D. Jock demanded, "Hey, what the devil is happening?" "I think he was improving," but Bambi shook her head, speechless. Rashida took a deep breath and covered her mouth in a gasp as the doctor explained that his heart was under too much strain and that his organs were having problems. She yelled, "Oh my God, this is impossible." Kirk Frost took a step forward and touched Bambi's shoulder. "We are available to you for Scrappy. We have everything you need." Bambi's eyes were filled with tears, she stated. "All I need is for him to wake up. He must fight for me." Everyone froze, their faces unreadable as they held their breath. "We've done more tests," he said slowly. Before reporting the results, he took a moment to examine Scrappy's unconscious form. Bambi was about to pass out when Kurt grabbed her and restrained her, stating, "They don't make any promises." This suggests that she cowed Dr. Mitchell's side. His kidneys are no longer working as effectively, and his heartbeat is irregular. If this continues, he might. Dr. Mitchell nodded, and young Jock's fists clenched as he screamed out, "Dialysis and high-dose treatments are on the horizon, but we need his body to react first. If it doesn't, we might have to think about placing him on life support." "Dude, this is incorrect. You guys must be able to do something." Oh, Mama's voice trembled as she cried, "My child is robust. He doesn't require any devices to survive." When those words hit, the room fell silent, and the heart monitor started beeping frantically, and Bambi's head turned to the screen. With his heart pounding, Dr. Mitchell rushed to the patient's bedside and told the nurses, "I know this is challenging, but our options are becoming limited." Panic was beginning to set in. Everyone's heart stopped beating in time with the erratic beat on the screen as the young athlete examined the nurses, gave out prescriptions, and quickly switched out the machinery, and the tension suddenly became unbearable. Dr. Mitchell exhaled as the beeping finally stopped. "Okay, we managed to stabilize him, but the fact that Bambi dropped into a chair after burying her face in her hands suggests that things are seriously out of control." "It's not possible," she cried out. "I can't let." Then Scrappy moved, twitching his fingers and shifting his eyes slightly as though the cosmos had heard them. When Bambi gasped, everyone rushed to join him. Mama D was kneeling beside her, Her hands clasped tightly, and she said, "We won't lose him, baby. We're going to fight. We're going to fight with all of our might." Young Jock shook his head and paced the room, saying, "This isn't how things should be." His voice was hardly audible. "I'm here. I'm Scrappy," strained to maintain eye contact. His voice was weak. His breathing was shallow. "Then what's going on?" Dr. Mitchell spoke softly. "You've been in the intensive care unit, Scrappy. Your body is battling fearfully in an attempt to comprehend." Scrappy swallowed. "Am I going to die?" Bambi quickly raised her eyebrows and replied, "No, sweetheart, you will be all right. All you need to do is stay alive." Dr. Mitchell's face remained serious, and Scrappy realized that he needed to battle even harder since everything would be decided in the next 24 hours. Mother D brushed away her tears, and Scrappy forced a small grin, saying, "I'm still here. I got you," Scrappy replied, kissing his forehead and blinking slowly. But as optimism began to overtake him, the strange silence was broken this time by the beeping machines, which seemed like a menacing clock ticking away every second in the unsure hospital room. Dr. Mitchell's face grew white, Scrappy stiffened, and his breathing became erratic. The equipment were shrieking once more, and the nursing team felt pain, causing the room to erupt in terror. It was life or death, and the battle was only just beginning. It was far from over. Everyone was reminded by the beep and machine noise that Lil Scrappy's time was running out. The once bright rapper, whose enthusiasm had captivated the globe, now looked like a fragile shell fighting for survival, his chest barely rising with each slow breath. After spending several hours by Scrappy's bedside and experiencing restless nights, Bambi sat next to him, her hand shaking as she held his limp hand. "Please, Scrappy, you promised me you wouldn't abandon me," mumbled Mama D, the matriarch who had always been Scrappy's strongest ally. As she paced back and forth, her hands gripping her phone so tightly that they whitened her face and knuckles, her eyes swollen from crying, and her stomach twisted in fear every time the monitors beeped. She had been a rock throughout her life, but now she could only watch as her son's life was at Jeet's celebration. She prayed to herself, but she realized in her heart that there was more to it than faith alone. That faith alone would not save him now. With hashtags like #fight taking over Twitter and Instagram, fans flocked to social media outside the hospital with prayers and requests for Scrappy's recovery. We all hoped for an internal miracle, prayed and watched, but things weren't the same. With the hashtag prayer for Scrappy's heart and foot, friends, fellow artists, and even some who had previously battled with him had written comments to their followers urging them to remember Scrappy as his liver condition worsened. The alarming findings of the most recent test had just prompted the doctors to step in. How did this happen? How could it have changed so quickly? Bambi's voice trailed off as she posed the question that had been on everyone's mind. "But just yesterday, you said he was getting better." Dr. Mitchell inhaled deeply, regret gleaming in his eyes. He could feel the strain increasing on his already troubled heart, and his oxygen levels had dropped again. Although his organs have improved somewhat, problems have now surfaced, which were not always anticipated. Mama D questioned incredulously and in an IR tone, "What do you mean? It's not enough. What should we do?" Dr. Mitchell hesitated, his face darkening, and said, "You're telling me that you're at your limit. While we're doing everything we can, we might need to take." He is a belligerent person, therefore you can't do that. Scrappy's protective instincts will take over, and this is not how she will die. If he doesn't stabilize within the next 24 hours, we might have to consider emergency dialysis or possibly a transplant. If his heart continues to fail, we might have to put him on life support. Bambi began sobbing uncontrollably as her voice broke with raw anguish. "My son," Mama D stepped forward. "We are going to fight. We must." Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. He has endured too much to give up at this point. Bambi and Mama D felt that time was running out, but they were at a loss for words as the doctor left the room, and their silence grew more intense. "He isn't going anywhere. We're doing everything we can for the next 24 hours, but we have to be prepared for anything." Even though fans continued to leave encouraging comments, the tone had changed as news outlets ran articles with headlines like "Doctors fear Scrappy's life is on the line and Lil Scrappy's condition worsens. Family desperate recovery." Reporters frantically searched for any information as paparazzi cameras flashed outside the hospital as the media circus outside intensified. The primary concern was survival, and now that she was at her breaking point, Bambi stood up with a determined voice. Mama D nodded, admitting that despite her own emotional struggles, not all we're doing is praying. "We are engaged in combat. We will not abandon him. Everyone needs to be called," she said. "We need as many prayers as POS possible. We must fight. We must not abandon him." Bambi pulled out her phone and dialed her close friends and family. Even in the face of the seeming loss of hope and the prayers that love must be enough, she was sure that Scrappy's spirit would endure through his loved ones. The tension in the room must have been unbearable because Scrappy was constantly reminded of his vulnerability by the buzzes and beats of the machinery around him, and every time the machine sounded, Bambi's hand grip tightened around his, preventing him from releasing it. Now the miracle arrived at the exact moment he needed her most. Scrappy's twitching fingers, a small movement that might have gone unnoticed, meant the world to Bambi, who gasped and leaned closer, struggling to focus as her heart pounded in her chest. She spoke in a hopeful voice, and Scrappy's eyes, unable to focus, opened and closed. He mumbled, breathing, and his barely audible voice was enough. A collective sigh of relief filled the room, still reverberating in the doorway, but Dr. Mitchell remained composed, kissing him on the forehead and saying, "Don't worry, you'll be fine. Just take a nap." Mama D knelt beside her son and wiped away her own tears, stating, a little smile came to Scrappy's lips. Bambi's heart grew as she sobbed hysterically. "I'll stay here." "I understand you," he replied, but as the glimmer of hope appeared, Scrappy's chest rose and fell in response to a series of harsher-than-before beeps from the devices. He stepped closer, his face solemn and unconvinced, his eyes focused on Bambi's as he whispered, "You must continue to fight for us. Everything will be decided in the next 24 hours. We must work swiftly, injecting drugs, adjusting machines, and coordinating with a sense of urgency that only came with life or death situations." As nurses poured into the room and Dr. Mitchell yelled in an anxious voice, Bambi's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she questioned haltingly. The medical staff rushed into the room to try to stabilize him in quick, irregular breaths as his body tensed with pale faces. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctors all sighed collectively, and Dr. Mitchell turned to Mama D and Bambi. "We have stabilized him for the time being, but this is what happened when YJC lost his temper in the corner." Hours went by as everyone watched the heart monitor and hoped that the beeping would stop as he yelled, his voice shaking with fear. "I can't let him go." After Bambi collapsed into a chair with her head in her hands. "Her hands cannot be in mine. We won't lose him. We'll battle till he overcomes this. It's only the beginning. Given his precarious state, we must be prepared for anything. The war was just getting started, not finished. This is a fight for Lil Scrappy's life, so please, during the next 24 hours, every prayer counts. If you believe that support works, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Together, we can help Scrappy and his family through this very difficult time. For the latest updates on this shocking situation, please subscribe to our channel. We'll keep you informed at every stage of the story. Tenacious.